So last week I had a coach from our Nutrition Coaching Academy community reach out to me with a really tough client case. It sounded super familiar. This client is eating barely anything and not losing fat. It's super frustrating, but also sounded very familiar. So I gave her some advice and helped her troubleshoot the situation. And I wanted to pass along the situation and what I said to you here. Okay, so we have this a client that the coach has been working with since February. So right now we're in like about 8 months, 7 or 8 months. The client is 48 years old, perimenopausal, and since February, with the intent of going in of like losing some weight and getting stronger, but really struggling with weight loss, despite like being on a reported calorie deficit or the plan being a calorie deficit throughout that entire time. And things really haven't been moving. Let's talk about the current coaching plan here. So her calories were set, and this is after trying higher levels of food, are now in the last little bit set at 1,200 calories per day. But even then, the client typically reports that she's eating 900 calories per day. She's got a protein goal within that set at 100 grams per day that she rarely hits, despite giving recommendations and different foods to include and recipes, just still never getting there. Fiber goal as well, set at 25 grams per day, with the emphasis being on like including more fruits and vegetables and sample meal plans around that would look like, and just never really gets there around eating enough fiber. In terms of exercise, she's doing at least 2 strength sessions per week in person with the coach. And for non-physical activity movement, like in terms of like meat-based stuff, she's the goal is to take 8 to 10,000 steps per day, but she never really consistently gets there. In terms of how she's navigating her nutrition, the plan is to log her nutrition and track towards those targets using MyFitnessPal. Um, but it's just like loosely reported in terms of using the tracking app to as a journal and to log the food, but it's never really being like weighed consistently using a food scale, despite the coach being like, hey, in terms of accuracy and stuff, that would really help. In the last little bit, there's been some medication changes in terms of some HRT with an estrogen patch and progesterone, as well as due to some issues with blood sugar long term and not being truly diabetic, but still having like a borderline high A1C, being prescribed metformin. So those are some changes with medication. In the past, alcohol consumption has been quite a bit higher. And this is the coach filled me in on all this. And was like, hey, what do I do about this? Because we're going to talk about the results in a second. But used to consume quite a bit of wine, um, maybe on like a nightly basis, but now it's been reduced quite a bit, only occasionally on the weekends. Here's the thing, like based on all this stuff, if you're listening to this and thinking like, okay, well, she's got to be losing weight, she just hasn't so far. And this is where we got to put on our detective hat, and why so many coaches spiral is because they think like, what is going on here? Why isn't this client losing weight? So over the last 8 months, she's fluctuated around like plus or minus 4 pounds. It's essentially been unchanged over the last 7 months. She has quite a bit of body fat around her midsection, carrying it centrally. She'd like present and describe herself as having that menopause belly, feeling really inflamed and puffy in terms of like maybe there's some inflammation there or additional inflammation, not like it's being perceived and presented that way, but we don't know for sure. In terms of measurements and strength, she is down some inches around her waist, and getting and feeling a little bit stronger in training. So we don't have any outside of like clothes fitting somewhat differently and some of those inches changes. Sounds like, measurements are changing quite a bit, and maybe she's putting on some muscle, but the overall body composition changes have been minimal. And this coach reached out to me and said like, hey, this is driving me crazy. I don't know what to do. It's very frustrating, and I don't know where to go from here, despite my best attempts to coach this client and give her different things to work on. All right, so here's what I would do in this situation. You have this client who's reporting barely doing anything, eating anything. They are doing some strength training and doing some of the right things, but not seeing any results. it's super frustrating. But the first thing that I pass along to the coach was reminding her that the client is in the driver's seat, especially when it comes to the way they're perceiving the situation. For the most part, one of the first things I asked her was, like, how's the client dealing with this? Are they super frustrated? Or are you more frustrated about the lack of results? Because what I'm hearing is that, yeah, she hopes that things would be going better, but expectation wise and contentment, she's in a pretty good place. She's getting stronger. She hasn't got quite as lean as she'd want, but things are moving in the right direction. And many times as a coach, we get too wrapped up into, how we think things should go and our ego around not figuring it out, instead of just listening to the person in front of us. Because for the most part, she's content with the way things are going. Do we want it to be better? Yes, but we can't let our need and want to figure things out overshadow some of the good things that are going on, or push too hard to the point where the client leaves us because of that. So we need to put them in the driver's seat. With that being said, most of this frustration and the lack of results, 9 times out of 10, the simplest answer is the best answer. This is a lack of compliance. Like, the client just isn't doing things accurately. Like, they're just not, like, things are just, they're reporting certain things. What they're reporting and what they're actually doing are apples and oranges, which is tough because we don't have good data, but we also need to train people to be a bit more accurate and push them in that direction, especially when things aren't going well. And that's not what we're going to do or resort to in many cases. We're going to think the situation is much more complicated and go to, step 5 of the troubleshooting and think about the hormonal situation, think about, is there anything else going on in terms of like barriers, mold toxicity, super low energy, something that we can't see internally that's, getting in the way of this process. And it could be that, but chances are it isn't. And it is a compliance thing. They're just not actually doing what they're saying they're doing. And they can be doing much more. Now, we don't like finger wag and kind of blame them into saying, why isn't this working? What we need to do, and this is a coaching conversation, but also sort of like a sales conversation. Those two things are really similar. We need to get them to see why it's in their best interest to rise to the occasion and be more accurate. Us saying these things and reminding them of what they're not doing, it just doesn't work. Like, it doesn't stick. What we need to do through different lines of questioning, through different almost like presentations of evidence, is show them the things that they're not doing and get them bought into why they need to do them, because it's in the best interest of their results and their energy and time and effort. That's the tough thing to do, but that's what I want to show you how to do here today. The default here is that in so many situations, the client and even the coach is going to look for some external thing that's out of their control to test and look into. We're talking about like hormones or mold toxicity or something along those lines. Like, why isn't this working? When in reality, it's a compliance issue. And what you want to do and you want to be careful about here is you want to shift the blame to the lack of results. Like, you don't want to just blame them and say you're not doing the right things. Maybe there's a time and a place for that, but that time and place isn't right now. What you want to do is shift the blame on, like, this should be working a lot better than it is right now. Like, let's get to the bottom of this through digging a little bit more and collaborating on the solution. And in many cases here, like, the simple answer is the better answer. They're not actually eating 900 to 1200 calories. They're guesstimating instead of weighing. Maybe they're forgetting to log like bites in snacks, drinks, and like condiments, things that are just missing, as well as just underreporting on certain things. So they're missing out on stuff. It's not being logged, or when they are logging it, it's just not super accurate. There's a time and a place to use a food scale. This would be a perfect time because their time, energy, and effort is generally, like, for the most part, going to waste, although they feel like things are moving in the right direction, but it could be so much better. So there's a time and a place to do that. There's generally like missed days, inconsistency through periods of time, like the weekends or higher stress days. And generally, Like they're moving a lot less. They're sitting more, they're under recovering. And that could be because they're eating less food overall, but it's also because they're not reaching those targets and finding unique ways to push themselves a little bit more. What you want to do is shift the blame to let's use these things to get more accurate. Let's use these things to dial that all in so you can start to see results because that's what we both want. And shifting that way, not kind of finger pointing and being like, hey, why isn't this working? Why isn't this moving in the right direction? Here's how I would navigate the situation. I start to ask them questions that get them involved in the solution. So it's like this coach said, yeah, I mean, ideally she'd be taking 8 to 10,000 steps per day, but she's never gotten over 4,000 steps. So we want to point that out. Hey, we're logging your steps, but you're getting to around 4,000 steps per day. Like what feels realistic to hit? On those days that you did well, like what were you doing? What were some of the activities? What could you do more of? A target is only as good if you can reach it. And if they're never consistently reaching it, you're never getting there. That number needs to be more realistic. That should be something to reach for and push for, but it should also be something that you can hit and build some momentum towards. The protein thing and the total calories, like review days that were really good and review days that were worse and not as good and compare them and get them reviewing these type of stuff so you're not always coming up with the solutions. Again, you can't care more about this, but you can prompt them to look into it. So hey, there was a day that you ate 108 grams of protein. Like what helped you reach your protein goal on that day? What were some of the foods that you included? How can you replicate that again so you can get there? And then from there, don't do all of this at once. Focus on one lever at a time. Maybe it's being more accurate with reporting and using a food scale at first. Then we're focusing on protein. Then we're dialing in the steps. Then we're focusing on increasing, recovery and sleep, and kind of going from there. This client is in a situation where there are things that could be getting in the way of progress hormonally, and we want to acknowledge those things as barriers, but you can't let them write the entire story. They can still lose weight and improve their body fat levels and move in the right direction. Don't let them become the entire story. Uh, Acknowledge them, but don't let them be the thing that like sets them back and the only thing they focus on and use as, I hate to use the word excuse, but use as a thing that like gets in the way of them making progress. So my framework for this stuff would be the following. Before we go too far down the path of more complex troubleshooting, let's just do a more intense calibration sprint. Let's do 2 weeks of really dialing things in. 2 weeks of logging all your food, weighing all your food, getting, a much more like laser focus magnifying glass over the things that you're doing and things that could be getting in the way of better results, and spend some time doing that to really see if it's a compliance issue. And at the heart of it, we want to shift the blame from the client to the lack of the results. The reason why we're doing this isn't because you're failing, it's because we need to figure this out. So let's spend some time a bit more focused with a bit more energy around accuracy and really see how this plays out. Also setting more realistic targets that they can actually reach and build some momentum doing. We spend a few weeks doing that, and we're gonna have a much better sense if this is a compliance issue or something else is going on. And that's where I would start. So my framework would be for how to approach this step by step is number one, verify the data. Like, is this client actually in a calorie deficit once we've gotten closer to those numbers? Like, is she logging with the food scale? How does it look? Uh, Also, then from there, honestly, there's usually something underlying that they're not logging, that they are missing, that they're not putting effort into. Again, we see this in the research all the time. We're talking like 30% of calories getting missed. So is that 1,200 calories actually 1,800 calories most of the time? It could be, right? That's the reality of the situation. Then from there, we start to look at like, yes, is there also other things that she's doing that are stopping her from moving more? Is she subconsciously moving less because she's not fueling herself properly as well? So setting a more realistic step goal, getting her, maybe there's accountability buddy, there's a way to push, there's a way to, you know, habits, environments that she can get into, move a little bit more.
And then from there, we start to think about, hey, if all that, we give 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month doing that, really dialed in on that like calibration sprint, then we start to think about like, is there something else that I'm missing? Then it's the thing that's, kind of the boogie monster around the hormonal context. Are those recent changes to her medication in HRT, are they still stabilizing? Is something like that getting in the way? Does that need to be further adjusted? Should we bring their healthcare team into the solution there? And then from there, again, always coach the person in front of you, not just the numbers. Meet them where they're at. And a lot of times it drives yourself crazy as a coach because you want it more for them. You want things to be different, but a lot of times people are pretty content with that, and you're thinking about this process much more than they are. So that's what I passed along to this coach. And there are a lot of things that were just like, reinforcements around stuff that she had already been doing, but also some light bulb moments. So I hope you find that helpful as well.
So that's what I would do, folks, especially in a situation when a client is reporting very low calories and the results just aren't there and it's super frustrating. Take a step back, recalibrate, take a look at the objective data, make sure everything is where it needs to be, coach the client and the person in front of you, not your frustration or ego and lack of results, and things will move in the right direction. Now, at this point, maybe you're interested in learning more about how to coach clients in perimenopause and menopause and through that life cycle. If you are, you're going to want to check out this video I've linked up right here. It's going to give you an entire scientific breakdown and how to apply the science for these clients to get them better results. You're going to learn more about that in this video right here. So check it out now, and I'll see you in the next video.